Good morning, students. In our last class, we were discussing about the sexual reproduction in plants, and as I told you about the microspores which are formed inside the anther of the flower. Where the anther is actually present, the anther is present at the stamen part where the anther is attached to the filamentous structure, that is the filament. Both the filament and the anther are making the stamen, which is actually a male reproductive part. So in this part, particularly in this anther, some particular cells are there which are known as MMC. The full form of MMC is microspore mother cell. So as the name suggesting us, these cells are the mother cell of the microspores, means these cells will produce the microspores in the anther. So there will be the meiotic division in them, and with the meiotic division, one microspore mother cell will form four microspores, and those four microspores are known as tetrads. So we can say that in any flower, the number of anthers are particular or the fixed number, and in each anther the microspore mother cells are also fixed. So there will be a particular number of microspore will be formed in a particular species of a flower. For an example, if we see the Solanaceae flower, Solanum, this plant is particularly belongs to the Solanaceae family. What happens in this flower? This Solanum, the full form of is the Solanum nigrum. What happens in this flower? In one flower, total 5 anthers are there, and in one anther, total 25 microspore mother cells are there. It means in one anther, the number of microspores which are formed will be 100, and in the whole flower, because there are 5 anthers, so total number of and the microspores will be the 500. Next, we have seen how the pollen grains or the microspores form in the male plant. Similarly, if we talk about the female plant, we have seen the female reproductive organ that is made up of three parts, that is stigma, style, and the ovary. Now, what is the role of all these three parts in the fertilization process or in the other reproduction process? We'll see this thing. If we see the structure of the ovary is made up by 8 cell structure. This is actually a 7 cell structure and 8 nuclei. How the 7 cell and the 8 nuclei are here? You can see here 2 synergid cells are here. These 3 are the antipodal cells. So these 3 and 2, 5. This one is the ovum or the ovule, and this one the particular cell in which all the cells are present. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the whole cell, it is the 7 number cells. And the 8 nuclei are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 2 nuclei are here. These 2 are the female pronucleus. This is ovule. These are the antipodal cells, and these are the synergid cells. Now, if we talk about the functions of the synergids and the antipodal cells particularly stop the entry of the pollen tube from this point inside the ovary. So at this particular point, the pollen tube cannot enter inside the ovary. Synergid cells, after the fertilization, the synergid cells will help in providing the nutritions or the nutrients to the zygote or the embryo part. The female pronucleus will fertilize with one male pronucleus, and they will form triploid condition, and that will be known as the triple fusion. We'll see it further. Now, what happens actually in the fertilization? Before going into the fertilization, we need to understand the pollination. What is pollination? As we have understood about the male gametes and the female gametes, how the plant is producing the male gamete and how the plant is producing the female gamete. Now the next condition is the pollination. Pollination is, you can see, the transference of of pollen grains from anther to stigma. Means, as we know that anthers are producing the pollen grains, that is the microspores, and the stigma which is present at the ovary. So it is present in the female reproductive part, it is present in the male reproductive part. So the male gametes or the pollen grains which are produced here, they will transfer from this end to this end of inside any flower, and that condition is known as, that process is known as the pollination. Now the pollination is of two types. One is the self-pollination, the other is cross-pollination. What is the meaning of self and cross? This happens in the flower which is actually bisexual flower. Means monoecious plant, because on the monoecious plant, the plant has the flower which have both type of sex organs in the flower, that is the male and female. That's why this is the bisexual flower, in which what will happen, if we see it by the figure, we can get a clear idea about it. This is the innermost part of a flower, and these are the colorful green leaves of the flower, that is the petals. Here you can see these are the bilobe structure, that is the anther, and the outermost leaves here. So if you see the part, this is the thalamus part at the bottom of the flower. This is the outermost part, that is the sepal. These are the colorful leaves which are known as the petals. This is the third whole of the flower, that is the stamen, in which anther is there, and anther is producing the pollen grains. And the innermost part, this is the pistil, in which three parts are there, the stigma, style, and the ovary. So what is actually happening here? The pollen grains which are actually formed here inside this anther. So from this anther, the pollen grains are falling on the stigma of the same flower. That condition is known as the self-pollination. Now in this pollination, there is no need of any particular agents, because this process is happening inside the flower only. So it is the natural process. Naturally, this anther of the flower will release the pollen grains from it, and the pollen grains will fall inside it on the stigma. This is the self-pollination. Now if we see about the cross-pollination, as we are saying, it is a cross process. Means cross will always take place between two different flowers. Means it is happening only in the unisexual flower, or you can say dioecious plant. Unisexual flower means the flower which is having both the sexes on the different flowers. Means one plant is only bearing the flower which is having the male reproductive organ or the stamen, and the other flower is only bearing the female reproductive organ, that is the pistil. Otherwise, the two other wholes which are known as the sepal and the petals, which will be present in both the flowers. Now what will happen? This flower is a male flower, and it is producing the pollen grains. Now these pollen grains will fall on the stigma of these flowers, and both the flowers are present on the different plants. So what will happen? These pollen grains are going from this flower to this flower, but they cannot move by their own. They need some agents. Agents are those which take this pollen grains and which carry these pollen grains from this flower to this flower, and they are known as the agents. The agents are of different types: water, the wind, some insect, bats. These are the agents which usually take this pollen grains along with them, and they will go on to the next flower, and they will transfer that pollen grains to that flower. If we see that insect in the search of the nectar, they will sit on these flower, and on that particular time the pollen grains will just stick to their body, and when they will go and sit on these flower, the pollen grains will be left on the stigma of this flower, and this is how the pollination will take place. Similarly, the water and the wind, when the water current comes or the wind blows, that time what happens, the pollen grains will just move away with the water and the wind, and when the water and the wind current will stop, the pollen grains will uh, transfer to the different flower that is having the female part or the stigmal part, and then the pollination will take place, and the bats will also perform the same function. Now after the after the transference of the pollen grains, after the pollination, what is happening? The pollen grains form a tube like structure that is known as pollen tube. This pollen tube will enter inside this ovary at a particular place, and then the pollen grains will start moving through the particular pollen tube. How it will take place? Suppose this is the ovary and these are the anthers. Now what is happening? The anthers has produced pollen grains in it. These pollen grains are falling on the stigmal part here like this. Then after that, this stigma will secrete some chemicals which will give the nutrition to these pollen grains, and finally the pollen grains will produce a tube-like structure from here, and this tube will enter inside this ovary. At what place the ovary, the pollen tube, this is the pollen tube, will enter inside the ovary, it will depend on the particular flower. Suppose at this place the pollen tube is entering into the ovary, and then first of all one male pronucleus, this is a male pronucleus, will enter into this ovary, and we know, as we have seen the structure of the ovary, already inside the ovary two female pronucleus are present. These are the female pronucleus, and which are two, that's why we can say it is 2n, and 1n is here. When this male pronucleus will come and it will fertilize with this female pronucleus, then it will form a cell structure, one cell structure, and it will be 3n condition. Then after the second pronucleus, the second male pronucleus will enter inside this, and we know the other cell is present in the ovary, that is the ovule, and the ovule has its own nucleus. Then this male nucleus will go and will bind with this female nucleus and with the nucleus of the ovule, and then finally it will form 2n condition. So with the help of two male nucleus will fuse with two female pronucleus, and they will form triple N condition, that is the triploid condition, and one female pronucleus, that is the nucleus of ovule, and they will form 2n condition, and the whole process is known as triple fusion and double fertilization. Why triple fusion and double fertilization? Because here you can see triple fusion means two cells are already present in the female pronucleus, and one cell is also coming and they are making 3n condition. That's why we are calling it a triple fusion. And why double fertilization? Because two times the male nucleus is fertilized, one with the ovule, one with the nucleus of the ovule, and one with the nucleus of the female pronucleus. That's why we are calling it a triple fusion and the double fertilization. Then after, what will happen? This 2n condition, this ovule which is fertilized, that will form the zygote, the embryo, and the seed. And similarly, this triple N condition, which will further form the endosperm, which will provide the nutrition to the seed, and then finally the whole ovary, after the development, it will convert into the fruit. So this is happening in the plant, how the plants are actually reproducing and how they are generating the seeds, and then now from these seeds, this fruit we will use to eat, and the seeds which are present in the fruit, these seeds we generally use to sow into the soil, and then again the new plant, the same type of the plant, will again start to germinate and start to grow. This was all about the the fertilization, or you can say the sexual reproduction in the plant. And now in the next class we'll start the sexual reproduction in the human beings. Till then, bye bye, have a nice day. Thank you.